Greenland is a truly strange and interesting place. Despite its vast landmass, it has an extremely small population and an equally small economy. Its economy relies heavily on fishing and support from Big Brother Denmark. If it weren't situated on such a large and remote island, it would be little more than a small village economically. It has even fewer people and less economic output than many postal codes in the US. Furthermore, unlike Iceland, another North Atlantic country with which it is often confused, Greenland is rich, but not extraordinarily rich. Its GDP per capita is about half that of Iceland. Despite the apparent similarities, this is the reality. Without consistent funding from more established countries, Greenland would struggle not only to keep its economy afloat, but even to survive. Although people have lived in these harsh lands for thousands of years, in the last 30 years those same people have realized that there are other options and have begun to move to places that offer more opportunities and receive more than 12 hours of daylight a year. Therefore, Greenland's future is uncertain at best. But that's not why major economies are interested in Greenland. What really attracts them is its potential. For better or worse, Greenland has recently been making headlines, attracting the attention of the US. The reason, and why it continues to receive so much foreign support, is its potential to be a major resource producer, a major strategic outpost, a trading hub on some of the world's fastest-growing maritime trade routes, or perhaps simply to secure a political legacy. This unique position in the geopolitical landscape can teach us a great deal about the strange dynamics of our new global economy. Equally interesting is how this small economy operates internally. Beyond current events, such isolation creates significant challenges. So how does the Greenland economy function? Why are global superpowers vying for it? And what does all this mean for the future of this peculiar region? Now, to properly understand the Greenland economy, the first step is to understand what Greenland is. Greenland is a country in its own right, however, it is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. This sovereign state consists of Denmark, the Faroe Islands, and Greenland. In many ways, this is similar to Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom. Greenland has its own head of government, the Prime Minister or Premier of Greenland. However, the Prime Minister of Denmark, currently Mette Frederiksen, is technically the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Denmark and makes policy for all of these countries. The people of Greenland vote for their own parliament and also send 2 representatives to the Danish parliament. However, citizens of Denmark cannot vote for the Greenland parliament. The people of Greenland have the choice of holding either a Danish or a Greenlandic passport. However, in matters such as citizenship and free movement within the European Union, Greenland and its people are considered Danish citizens. These are technical details. But before this devolves into a CGP Grey video about the oddities of combining a 4,500-year-old settlement, a century-old kingdom, decades of representative government, and 30 years of a supranational economic union, it's important to set aside the technical details and focus on the practical realities. Greenland has a population of only 57,000 people and a total economic output of just $3.3 billion. Even its largest city is essentially a small village. It's so remote and difficult to live in that any modern and advanced industry could be established there, more logically on the European mainland or in the relatively more developed Iceland. Despite all these challenges, Greenland is still a high-income country. Although, to be honest, it does cheat a bit. Its largest sector is public administration, which is largely financed by transfers from Denmark. Almost half of its tiny workforce is employed by the state in some way. This is an excessive rate even in a large and sprawling country. However, in a small and relatively simple place like Greenland, it's not hard to say that this is essentially a rebranded welfare system. Denmark also subsidizes private supermarket chains operating in this ultra-remote region. Greenland Airlines also operates state-supported flights connecting even more remote settlements, because we're talking about a country where even a city of 25,000 is considered too crowded. The Kingdom of Denmark also controls and covers the costs of foreign policy and defense. This situation is similar to England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland addressing these issues together. However, the practical difference is that they are located in the same region, while Greenland isn't even on the same continent as Denmark. Denmark's support for Greenland's survival isn't actually charity, it's part of normal governance. In most economies, there are regions that receive more public spending in taxes than they produce. The only reason the Greenland example seems strange is because of its extreme remoteness and isolation. The long-term goal is to gradually reduce this support as Greenland finds alternatives to maintain its quality of life, whether by becoming more independent from Denmark, or, as some people desire, completely independent. However, this process is slow because, in practice, it is extremely difficult for such a small, remote, and barren country to establish domestic industries that would generate these high incomes. Of course, the main reason we're examining Greenland is the renewed interest of the US in claiming the country, apparently at any cost. At first glance, this seems like the world's most powerful nation wanting to seize the geopolitical equivalent of a still poor child. This doesn't seem like something worth risking strategic relations with a country that is a vital part of the EU and a NATO ally. But to be fair, there are a few potential things the US sees in this otherwise inconspicuous economy. The first is resources. Greenland is a large, largely untapped landmass rich in natural resources, including rare earth elements, precious metals, rubies, sapphires, diamonds, and, big bird's favorite, oil and natural gas. However, there's a difference between these resources being there and actually being put to good use. While a number of resource-rich areas have been extensively explored, mining in Greenland is virtually non-existent. The only active mine in the country extracts anorthosite, used in rock wool insulation, and even that makes a limited contribution to the already small economy. The problem is that, yes, the resources are there, but the harsh climate, vast distances, and small workforce make them extremely difficult to extract profitably. Some of these problems could be overcome with infrastructure investments and the introduction of temporary workers. Furthermore, the retreat of the ice sheet covering much of the island makes it easier to access these resources and establish the necessary transportation infrastructure. However, all these initiatives must be balanced against the existing population, who will not welcome their country becoming a remote mining outpost. Nevertheless, they are trying to encourage foreign investment to realize the potential revenues. Another important point of interest is Greenland's strategic location at the top of the world. With the melting of the ice sheets, new sea routes through the Arctic have become available, shortening distances between major trading partners by thousands of miles. Russia is now aggressively pushing to take advantage of this, because despite its vast territory, the country has historically struggled to access the world's oceans for trade and military power projection. The US, meanwhile, wants to benefit from these new trade routes and simultaneously gain influence over them to protect its own region. The U.S. military presence in Greenland is not new. Thule Air Force Base has existed since the early 1950s and was established to detect missiles that could be launched from the Soviet Union early and to serve as a strategic airfield. Today, it is technically operated by the U.S. Space Force, however, to our knowledge, it serves a similar function. The U.S. does not pay direct rent for the base. Since Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, and Denmark is part of NATO, this is maintained under NATO agreements. However, in such a small economy, this base is not an insignificant factor. Approximately 600 personnel are stationed there, which is more than 1% of the population. It also provides contract work to local businesses. The exact figures are naturally not publicly available, however, operating such bases is not cheap, effectively amounting to an international export of services. Even before the recent interest, this base has been the subject of various controversies. Nevertheless, the U.S. will likely retain this outpost for as long as it wishes, gaining a strategic advantage without assuming full responsibility for Greenland. No one can predict the future, economists certainly can. However, it is highly unlikely that Greenland will become part of the U.S. in the near future, and even less likely that it would be an economically viable move. Land purchases do happen. The U.S. purchase of Alaska from Russia is famous. But that was a long time ago, and the practice has largely been abandoned worldwide. The most recent land purchase was in 2017, for a completely uninhabited desert island located between Saudi Arabia and Egypt. Before that, it was done in 1963 for a few border towns between West Germany and the Netherlands. It's so old that the purchasing country doesn't even exist anymore. The only reasonable path would be for Greenland and its people to want to join the US through a referendum. This isn't impossible. Some polls suggest support, but these are unreliable at best. The country would first need to be completely independent from Denmark, which we've seen how difficult that is. Then they would have to want to be under the control of another overseas government again.